Thanks, by the way, to the 500 team. This is a fantastic conference. It's my first time being at a 500 conference, though I've been part of the family for a while. So, hi, I'm Gagan Biyani, here to talk a little bit about sort of some of the lessons that I've learned over the last year or two that have shaped my sort of philosophy on growing companies, and something that I think is quite different actually from sort of where my head was at maybe 2 years ago, if you ever saw me talk or talk to me in person earlier. A little bit about my background. About 5 years ago, I co-founded a company called Udemy, which is a marketplace for online education, a place where instructors can go on, teach online courses, and anyone can come take them. Then went to Lyft, which is a ride-sharing platform, very similar in model. It's also a marketplace, of course, and was sort of a growth advisor there. I basically just got to hang out in their offices for 6 months and help them on growth and kind of helped them launch Lyft in Los Angeles, and so worked on both the supply and demand side there. And then went to Sprig, and recently started Sprig we launched in November, so it's really only been like 16 weeks that we've been in service, but we came up with the idea sort of last April, and the thing that I think is really interesting about, or sort of that when I reflect upon this career arc is the very different styles of sort of growth of these three companies. At Udemy, we were sort of growth hacking in a lot of ways, right? Like we do, significant email marketing, we do significant paid acquisition, we do a lot of sort of growth style tactics, and I think in a lot of ways we were one of the sort of dozen or 24 companies that sort of pioneered a lot of the sort of weekly rhythm of growth, where we have weekly meetings in which we talk about, actually very similar to what it sounds like they do at Warby, though I can't take any credit for that. I'm just saying, like, we came up with the same thing separately, and it's just this idea that basically you run a growth team internally within the company, and that team is sort of entirely focused on getting the numbers to go up and to the right. And I think after leaving Udemy and going to Lyft, one of the most fascinating experiences was to be inside a company where nobody was doing marketing at all, and it was still going up and to the right. In fact, a lot faster than Udemy in some ways, which was kind of an interesting experience. And because I got the experience to go in and sort of hang out at another company and see it literally grow like a rocket ship, I joined November of last year when there were 30 employees. And sort of fast forward a year and 3 months later, and by the way, when I joined, they had just closed a $15 million Series B, and now they have, reported 200. I have no idea, but a reported $250 million in the bank, and then on top of that, over 200 employees. It's crazy to think about that kind of growth in a year and 3 or 4 months. And I think one of the main lessons of that was just the idea that word of mouth and sort of focusing really closely on word of mouth can be a super powerful growth mechanism. But the challenge is that you can't get word of mouth right unless you're not doing the other things that you would normally do to do growth. So the lesson that I have from Udemy, Lyft, and Sprig is that whatever your growth channel, whether it's going to be B2B sales, or whether it's going to be word of mouth, or whether it's going to be paid acquisition and sort of growth hacking, like you absolutely have to force your team to focus and not do the other types of growth channels, because distraction is the enemy of success. And ultimately, if you really truly want to be successful at something, even when it's not working, you have to continue to devote to it. But then, of course, you have to be nimble enough to realize that if it's not working, because it's never going to work, to switch. And then sort of a tough balance there. But now I'll tell you a little bit about Sprig. Sprig is dinner on demand. What we do is you can open up your phone any day, anytime you're hungry, and order a delicious meal delivered to you within 15 to 25 minutes. It's cooked all in-house. It's organic, local, and healthy. And the thing that's really magical about Sprig and why people love it so much, it's only been around for 16 weeks, but why people love it, you can search Eat Sprig on Twitter and you'll know what I'm talking about, but is because we've spent our entire time building this company doing absolutely nothing on growth and focusing our entire efforts, every single person on the company, on building an amazing experience. And what that really means is actually before we even launched Sprig, I had a very specific conversation with the entire team. We're going to go here first. No more cheating. The basic philosophy that we have and by the way, we will eventually do growth tactics. I think you'll start seeing a lot of marketing from us in the next 6 months. But there's sort of a phased approach to building companies that we took into account at Sprig, and it kind of follows this pattern. So the first thing is that you have to find product market fit. Everybody talks about this, and the lean startup movement talks about this, but the thing that people don't realize is how freaking disciplined you have to be about this. When you're finding product market fit, you cannot try and grow your business. They're not the same problem. And the thing that I always see is an entrepreneur who still doesn't have product market fit, and they're asking me for growth advice, or they're asking a friend for growth advice, and they're trying to get the numbers to go up and to the right because they're like, shit, how am I going to raise my next round? Well, unfortunately, the reality is that it's going to take you longer to raise the next round if you can't find product market fit, so you should just focus on that. And then more importantly, raising your next round should not be your goal. Your goal should be building multi-billion-dollar companies that change the world. And if that's true, then raising the next round is largely irrelevant. What matters is whether you're going to actually spend the next 5 years of your life on a company that's worth it. So that's the first step. Then on the second thing, once you've figured it out, once you see that you really have a product people fucking love and they rave about it, they talk about it all the time, that's when you can start implementing growth tactics and really figure that out. And then the third thing is just blow it out of the water. Something that I will not talk too much about today, mostly because A, I'm no expert in it, and B, because it's less relevant to most people, but certainly I think a really interesting topic as well. So no more cheating. What that means is that when we launched Sprig, there were no ads. We did not do any Facebook ads, no marketing whatsoever, no paid acquisition at all. We also did not do any discounting. Actually, even to this day, my friends, my little brother cannot get a discount on Sprig, right? And again, we will change all of this, so I'm going to say this now, and in 2 weeks you're going to be like, shit, Gagan, you're doing discounts now. I'm like, yeah. That's true, because eventually we will enter the growth phase, which is the phase that we're just about to enter in at Sprig. But in the beginning, we did none of this. For the first 16 weeks of the company, we're burning, I can't even tell you how much cash compared to what a normal seed company is, because we're making food and sort of delivering food and all this operational stuff. And yet at the same time, we did not discount even once. And then the final thing is we didn't cheat in terms of product distraction either. So one of the things about Sprig is it's super simple. You open up your phone, there's 3 options every day. You pick one of them, and we deliver them to you. If you're 2 people, you pick 2 of them, or you pick 2 of the same one, and we deliver it to you. There's only 3 meals, nothing else. Well, one of the things that does is that it enables us to, and by the way, no restaurant opens with 3 items on their menu, right? And there's no such thing as sort of there's no such thing as going to a sort of sit-down, fine dining restaurant and them saying look, you know what, you don't have any choice today. You're just going to eat what I tell you. And if it is, it's really rare, right? So when we talk to our chef and we're thinking about this, one of the first conversations that happen is 2 to 3 weeks in, I shit you not, I've already preached focus to the team, and we're like, should we add a side salad to the menu, right? Customers are asking for side salad. They're asking for desserts. They're asking for beverages. And trust me, all of these things will exist on Sprig, hopefully soon. But in the beginning, we said no. And we literally just said no to everything as a team. We said no to anything that would distract us from our core focus, which was, do people want our product? And then more importantly, if they kind of want our product, how do we get them to really want our product so much? And how do we perfect our product so that the little things that we're doing on a daily basis are all focused on that one singular problem? And I think that's where the Sprig experience has come. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of things about the Sprig experience that I still want to fix, but the reality is that there's a lot of things that I think we've done really well. The first thing is that we focused a lot on design and packaging. And if you know me as a person, and you know sort of my trajectory, at Udemy and even at Lyft, I'm not exactly the most sort of sophisticated design-minded person. So one of the things I had to do very early on was bring on co-founders who understood how to do this and realize that I was not going to be sort of the person deciding the vision for the product, right? So I helped come up with the idea, but actually I did almost none of the things I'm going to talk about in this presentation because I don't really deserve a whole lot of credit for it. I just brought on great people who know how to do it. And so what we did is we spent the entire summer leading up to launching Sprig interviewing customers, doing hardcore design research, just like a lean startup, right? Customer development. And we interviewed people about what their dinner habits were like. What do they feel when they're eating dinner? What do they remember as their memorable moments for dinner, and what don't they? What do they like? What do they don't like? And we started to figure out a lot of things around what the menu is, around what the packaging should look like, around the fact that we should give them a little dessert, like a little free truffle or a free mendiant, chocolate mendiant at the end of their meal, because somehow people felt like dinner wasn't complete without something sweet at the end of it. And so whereas normally I think if we wanted to, we could have just delivered food in a takeout container on a mobile app, and theoretically, trust me, most VCs would have thought that this was the right move, right? Like when we were pitching Sprig, nobody really understood the customer experience side of this. But like the example is, we could have just delivered the product, the raw product, food in your belly, like within 15 minutes. And I think there are other companies out there, frankly, that have taken that approach. And we've taken a very different approach because we've realized that the incremental improvements in quality really make a huge difference. So when the first week we had 5 dishes that blew out of the water and everybody loved it, nobody cared because everybody was worried about that one dish that people didn't really like. And we've spent all of our time trying to perfect things like getting chicken to your door, delivered to you, and still have it be moist and soft when it arrives to your door after sort of a 30-minute delivery process, right? We figured out how to reverse engineer steak because we realized that steak is something people really want, but it's pretty much impossible to do delivery steak, I think, until we figured it out. And these are the types of things that your team can spend time focusing on if they're not focusing on growing the business. And this is sort of a graph that I'm really proud of that sort of shows our initial traction so far, which is, basically everybody who's come to Sprig has come through some sort of word of mouth channel. Like this is 98 responses and nobody's been taken out of this. And so what we did, basically 86% of our customers come through some sort of word of mouth, and 14% come through press, which I actually view as a word-of-mouth channel because I view press as the type of channel that helps improve your brand and your sort of overall ambient awareness of the customer to your product. And so that's all we've done so far. Now, one of the things that's important to realize is actually there's a very good framework by which you can start to figure out what elements of the product and what types of language you want to use in marketing to work. And this is the framework. By the way, this isn't very different from a lot of other frameworks you'll see. It's just a slightly different perspective. And what it is understanding that the customer has a very specific set of sort of a specific life cycle under which they go. And in each stage of the life cycle, they have a very different experience or interaction with the product. And so when we were doing our customer interviews over the summer, and when we're talking to customers to learn about what they're doing, and when I was at Lyft, for example, we actually divided up their entire behavior into 4 different categories. Before they buy, their first purchase, the time they're purchasing again and again, and then the referral. And so when we're trying to figure out how to improve the customer experience or what messaging to do, I'll actually go and interview customers and ask them about specific points in the funnel. I'll literally ask, so it's the same sort of customer development interview that you normally do. The only difference is I now put them in a point of time and I ask them questions based on that. So I'll actually say, before you ever heard about Lyft or before you ever heard about Sprig, what did you think? What were you thinking? What were you using? How did you get around? How did this solve your problem? And then I'll ask them questions like, okay, what made you finally use Lyft the first time, right? What made you use Sprig for the first time? And that's sort of this. And then the next thing is like, okay, why do you use it over and over again? And the final thing is, what do you tell your friends when you refer your friends to the product? And why do you refer it to them and what time? The thing that's really interesting is that when you break down the standard customer development interview process into these 4 categories, what you're able to do is better understand how a customer evolves over time and how the messaging and the branding and every interaction you have with them actually should be quite different in the beginning and the middle and in the end. Another way to think about it is, this is really what's going on in most people's brains when they're figuring out a new customer. We're not talking about tech people who try everything and love change. We're talking about most people, right? And so just to be clear, this framework will help those of you who are marketers convince your product and engineering team to change their messaging. Or if you have a very brand-focused company like at Lyft, one of the biggest challenges at Lyft that I had when I joined was that we were so good at brand that we were a little bit nervous sometimes about doing anything that was marketing related. And so what I had to do actually was create this framework and then go and conduct these interviews with potential drivers and potential customers and then show the data to the Lyft team and explain to them this model. And by the way, like there were plenty of people on the Lyft team who already understood this. I'm just saying this helped me in some of my conversations, which was I would go and interview people and I'd say, look, Lyft is all about community. Everybody here probably hears that word when we talk about Lyft. It's the number one term. But the problem is, before you've ever heard about Lyft, community is really not as important to you. And so one of the things that I learned when I was doing customer interviews was that in this phase, actually, it's not about community. It's actually about the utility of the service. And so if you ever look at a Lyft ad on mobile, which you won't ever see in the Bay Area because we're just way too supply constrained, but in LA and Seattle and New York, if you look at a Lyft ad, one of the things you'll notice is that we actually we don't talk about community at all. We talk about how it's cheaper than a cab and how it's fast and easy and reliable. And a lot of that came from understanding that, okay, at the point that that the person has never heard of Lyft, we're going to message them this way. But after that, you'll never see the same messaging happen again. And everything else is all about community and all about making people love the product and understanding, and the fist bump and the pink mustache and all of those things. So another way to think of this is just advertising, conversion, retention, virality. I often do acquisition, retention. There's sort of 100 different ways you can talk about this. Plenty of people have talked about marketing funnels. I think the important lesson here is just to tailor your interviews and your conversations with people to understand how they're thinking at different points in the funnel. This deck is going to go up online, and I'm running a little bit out of time, so does that time include questions? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to let you guys sort of read this real quick and then go over, and then it'll be posted online later. But these are examples of questions that I ask in customer interviews. By the way, the other interesting lesson of this, and maybe I skipped over it, is that most marketers don't actually do any customer interviews. I know tons of marketers. I run the Growth Hackers Conference, and I'm fucking floored by the number of people who just use data all the time. If you're gonna run an A/B test, it's much smarter, if you view A/B testing and conversion optimization to be a big thing, it's much smarter to have a good A and a good B when you go into the situation than to just throw shit at a wall in a whiteboard and then test it and figure it out, which, by the way, is how 95% of growth teams do, and that's the other sort of lesson, I think, of this talk. And so we talked a little bit about Lyft already, but sorry, this is the first time I've done this presentation, so I'm kind of going out of order. But so, the messaging that we do in the beginning of Lyft is 20% cheaper than a taxi. Then your first time is all about reliability. It's all about hey, when you press the Lyft button, you're actually going to get a car. Which right now, all of you guys are of course, Gagan. Well, the reality is in LA, if you're in LA and you're used to taking taxis, the biggest challenge you have is when you call a taxi company, you just have no idea whether they're going to show up or not. Right? And that was a lesson I had when I was interviewing people. And then after that, we focused really high on quality, and then, of course, the rest of the branding elements. So this is a little bit of sort of what has happened at Sprig. And I think what's really interesting here is the repeat customer graph, right? By focusing entirely, and what you'll see here, actually, this is the best part of this graph right here. You'll see this. As someone who's used to spending every week trying to figure out how to grow, it was mind-numbingly difficult to deal with the situation of saying, I had someone the other day in a meeting tell me, I can just tell that your finger is ready to push a button, but you're not willing to push it. And that button is marketing, right? And so what we did in the very early days of Sprig actually is we just couldn't do any marketing, and we had some flat points. There are multiple flat points on this graph, but by not cheating and not doing marketing, we eventually get stuff like this, or this, or this. And I think it's really, really interesting that level of focus actually worked, frankly, because when I was preaching this to my team, 3 or 4 months ago, I think it's really hard to see whether or not it's really going to work out. But I think so far we've shown at Sprig that it will work. And Lyft is a better example because they're such a big company that without sort of unknowingly actually did this exact same sort of thing. And, I think that's really exciting. So I encourage all of you. I know most people who sort of hear me talk are interested in growth tactics and things like that. But I think it's important to step back for a second and think about what you're really trying to do with your company. And it's really, you're trying to build a big company. And if you're not trying to build a big company, I'm not interested in helping you anyways, frankly. But if you're trying to build a big company that's going to change the world and make a big impact, you're not interested in the $10 or $50 million exit, you're interested in going long, this is the philosophy that I think really works. Thank you.
Questions?
Interested in what you were saying about if you focus too much on getting the next round of funding, you don't really focus enough on the product market fit. How do you keep that discipline of focusing on the product market fit when if
Yeah. Confidence. I mean, faith, whatever. Like, you just have to believe that you're gonna figure it out, and like, you have to understand the philosophy. If you don't fully appreciate the philosophy, then you're gonna cheat. Like, it's simple, right? It's like losing weight, or it's like trying to get, it's trying to do anything that you need to do, trying to get a job or whatever. Like, if you don't set those boundaries, and most people don't, by the way, like, and you aren't able to follow that philosophy because it's like flatlining for 1 week, and you like are 175 one day, and you're 175 the next day, you're like, shit. Like, those are the points at which you're actually supposed to keep going, right? Like, those are the times that matter the most. So when you're flat, what you should be doing instead is, instead of worrying about worrying about the growth, I would recommend worrying about why your customers don't care enough to share your product. And actually, like, if you spend all of your energy and time trying to solve that problem and figuring that problem out, then you're going to start doing a lot of the little things that are necessary. And then, oh, by the way, once you're at the stage that sort of I think we're getting to, we're not there yet, but once you're at the stage that we're getting to, and by the way, when I joined Lyft, they were definitely at that stage. Like, all I did there was growth hacking and marketing, like, straight up, okay? But once you get to that stage, then it's crazy. Then you're just off to the races. You're building, building, building. And if you're not, frankly, you should just go home and go to another company, right? Because you're much better off not spending 2 years of your life wasting away on a company that's never going to work out than you are, and just because you got $1 million of funding, like, who gives a shit, right? Like, honestly, that's not the game anymore. The game, if you really want to win, is to like figure out the best product possible and go work for that company or start that company. And it shouldn't matter so much, and that's a lot of this as well.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.